first witness, Mr. FitzPatrick, please.
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Bright, please.
Your right hand face the right, sir, please.
You swear that the evidence to be given by you to the court and to the jury sworn touching the matters in question between the parties shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you.
I do.
Where do you live, Mr. Bright?
123 Avenue Road,
And how old are you?
32 years old.
What is your occupation?
I'm a salesman
By whom are you employed?
by the Toronto Novelty and Toy Company.
For how long have you been employed by that company?
The last 2 years.
Mr. Bright, you were involved in an automobile accident on the 9th of February last. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And will you tell his lordship and the gentlemen of the jury, please, from where you were coming at the time of that accident?
I had been at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto with my girlfriend, and we had watched a hockey game, and I was taking my girlfriend back to Brampton, where she lived.
Between seeing the hockey game and the time of the accident, where had you been?
Well, we went to the Brass Rail Tavern on Yonge Street in Toronto, and we had a drink.
What did you have to drink there?
I had a beer.
Had you had anything to drink earlier in the day of an
No.
alcoholic nature?
No.
Had you taken any drugs?
No.
And what is the name of the young lady who was with you?
Marjorie Hanson.
Had she had anything to drink?
No, I don't think so. Not while she was with me.
For about how long had you been in the Brass Rail?
Oh, about 20 minutes, half an hour or so, I would imagine, at the most.
Were you driving your own car on this occasion?
I was.
What kind of a car was that?
It's a 1970 Chevrolet Corvette.
What condition was it in at the time of the accident?
It was in good mechanical condition.
What was the condition of the brakes?
It was good. They were working well.
Your tires?
Tires were good. I had new snow tires on the back.
And what was the condition of the tires on the front?
They were in good condition as well.
About how much of the tread as a percentage was there on them at the time of the accident?
Well, I really don't know. I know that when I obtained the car 6 months earlier, new tires were put on at that time. I bought it as a used car so that it only had 6 months driving on it.
Was your car equipped with a defroster?
It was, yes.
And was it operating prior to the accident?
It was.
Now, what was the relationship between you and your girlfriend as you drove along the highway just prior to the accident? Was there anything other than normal?
Well, we had had a quarrel earlier on at the Brass Rail Tavern when we left. And
Were you at all emotionally affected by that?
No, not really.
Did that have any effect on your driving?
No.
Now, commencing just a short distance back from where the accident occurred, will you tell his lordship and the gentlemen of the jury, please, what happened?
Well, I had passed through the intersection of Highway 27, and I was driving west on Highway 7. And I was facing some oncoming traffic. I think I recall 4 or 5 cars passing by. As these cars approached me, I lowered my headlight beam to the low beam, and the traffic passed, and after the last of these cars had passed by, I had traveled about a quarter of a mile or so, and then I raised my beams to the high beam, and immediately upon doing so, I saw an object in the roadway in front of me, and this startled me, and I immediately put on the brakes.
At the time you saw this object, where was your car traveling on the roadway?
I was driving along in the middle of my lane, the westbound lane.
And what was the condition of the roadway at the point of the accident?
Well, I recall there were patches of snow on the road, hard-packed snow. The road itself was straight and level.
What was the visibility?
Well, I could see what I felt was a safe distance ahead of me, and the visibility was relatively clear.
What was the condition of your windshield, with respect to how you could see through it?
Well, my windshield was clear. There were little patches of snow or frost, I should say, in the corners, but nothing in front of me. I could see clearly.
Do you recall what the temperature was that evening?
It was a cold night. I remember that. I don't know what the temperature was, but I felt cold standing outside after the accident.
Well, you told us that you saw this object just as you raised the beams of your headlight.
That's right.
And that you applied your brakes immediately.
I did, yes.
Did you do anything or attempt to do anything else at that time?
Well, I tried to. It all happened very quickly. I tried to turn the steering wheel of the car to the left to turn away and avoid Mr. Paget's car, but I just couldn't do so. The car didn't respond.
Do you know why your car didn't respond?
Well, yes, I do.
Would you explain that, please?
Well, I discovered, and I guess I knew it too at the time, that when you jam on your brakes, this has the effect of locking the wheels in place, and any effort to turn the steering wheel and change the direction of the car doesn't have any effect unless you release the brake, which I didn't do.
You told us that this all happened very quickly. Could you estimate for his lordship and the gentlemen of the jury how long elapsed from you first saw this object on the roadway in front of you until the impact occurred?
It was very sudden. It couldn't have been more than a second or so.
Do you know whether your car was on dry pavement or on this hard-packed snow at the time you applied your brakes?
Well, I think it was partly both. I think that there were skid marks on the road afterwards, and there was dry pavement, and there were also snow patches. I don't know exactly what was on the road at the point I put on my brakes.
Well, then, could you tell us if the entire course of the wheel marks on the road was on pavement, or if part of those wheel marks were on pavement and part on hard-packed snow?
Part on hard-packed snow.
As you approached the scene of the accident, were you engaged in conversation?
No, Marjorie wasn't talking.
Is there a radio in your car?
There is.
Was it on?
Yes, it was.
Were you smoking?
No, I wasn't.
Was there anything which was distracting your attention as you approached the scene of the accident?
No.
Do you know what part of the car of the plaintiff you came in contact with?
Yes, it was the driver's side rear fender.
And what part of your car came in contact with that?
The front right passenger side fender of my car, bumper and fender.
At the time of the impact, where was your car on the roadway?
My car was right in the middle of my lane.
And at that time, where was the plaintiff's car on the roadway?
His car was parked on or in my lane of traffic. It was about, I would say, it seemed to me it was taking up half of my lane. I would estimate it to have been 4 or 5 feet out from the shoulder. It was right in front of me as I came upon it.
As you, or at any time, did you observe any taillights on this car that was stopped on the roadway?
Well, I did. As I said, the first thing I became aware of was this object on the road. I immediately put on my brakes, and in the split second during which I was skidding into the vehicle, I recall seeing a taillight. One taillight.
Can you tell us which taillight it was that you saw?
It was the taillight that was just off on the shoulder of the road. I would presume it was the passenger side rear taillight.
Did you at any time see lighted the taillight on the left side of the rear of the plaintiff's car?
No, I did not.
Are you able to tell us why you didn't see that, if there was anything which obstructed your view of it?
Well, I don't recall. I don't think it was working.
Well, Mr. Bright, you mustn't tell us what you think. You can only tell us what you saw and, in some circumstances, what you heard.
Sorry.
Was the light working after the accident?
No, it was not.
Were you told anything about by Mr. or Mrs. Paget whether that light had been working before the accident?
No, we didn't discuss the light at all.
Now, you've told us where the Paget car was on the highway. Could you tell us whether or not that car could have been parked further to the north than it was?
Oh, definitely.
How much further to the north could it have been parked?
I feel it could have been parked right off the road. I feel that there was enough room on the shoulder that the car could have been completely removed from the roadway. At least 4 feet, 5 feet.
Were you able to see that yourself?
Yeah, I saw that after the accident when I was standing. We were waiting for the ambulance, and I looked at the place where the accident took place, and it struck me that Mr. Paget could have pulled right off the road and avoided the accident.
Did you observe any laneway or side road in the area?
Yes, I did.
Where was that, please?
That was only about 100 feet farther up the highway in a westerly direction, the direction that we were traveling.
Was it possible to see that laneway from the point of impact?
Yes, it was.
Did that laneway run north from the highway, or north and south, or what?
No, it was a laneway leading to a farmhouse which was on the north side of the road, same side that the accident
How
took
were you
place.
able to know that there was a farmhouse there?
Well, there were lights on in the farmhouse. It was set back from the road, but you could see the farmhouse.
Did you have any conversation with either Mr. or Mrs. Paget after this accident?
Well, at one point, Marjorie Hanson was speaking with Mrs. Paget, and I joined the conversation for a moment, and Mrs. Paget was talking about a flashlight. She was saying that she had, in the past, suggested or encouraged Mr. Paget to carry a flashlight in the car.
Did she say whether or not they had had one on the night of the accident?
She did not. She did not know.
Did you at any time see a lighted flashlight?
No, I did not.
Did you at any time after the accident see a flashlight in any condition?
No.
Did Mrs. Paget tell you anything about where Mr. Paget had been at the time of the accident?
Not at the scene of the accident, no.
Or at any time thereafter?
No, Mrs. Paget did not.
All right. Did either Mr. or Mrs. Paget tell you where Mrs. Paget had been standing at the time of the accident?
No, she didn't.
At any time prior to the accident, had you seen either Mr. or Mrs. Paget?
Well, I don't recall seeing or having seen Mrs. Paget, but of course, just when the impact occurred, Mr. Paget was right in front of the car, and I saw that I'd struck him.
Excuse me. Either at that time or afterwards, did you observe the clothing that Mr. Paget was wearing? And I mean from the point of view of its color.
I recall that he was wearing a suit, a business suit. It was a dark-colored business suit. I don't remember whether it was blue or black or gray or what it was, but it was dark.
Recall if he was wearing a top coat or an overcoat?
He was.
And can you recall anything about its color?
Well, it was a dark top coat. It was I believe it was a black top coat.
Do you recall what the color of the Paget car was?
I think it was green.
Light green or a dark green?
I don't recall it. I don't recall that. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Bright. Thank you, my lord.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Lord. Mr. Bright, you spoke to your counsel of seeing one taillight on this vehicle and believing it to be the one which was on the shoulder.
Yes.
You're quite sure of that?
Yes.
My lord, I'd like to refer the defendant to his discovery, and I'm not sure whether the explanation earlier given was sufficient, but
I
perhaps.
think it's probably ample.
I'm referring, Mr. Bright, to the occasion of your examination for discovery the 23rd of June. Do you recall that day?
I do.
And on that occasion being asked certain questions by me and giving certain answers?
I remember that.
And you were under oath at that time?
I was, yes.
Referring, my lord, initially to question 39 at page 5 of the transcript. Question, well, would you just tell us in your own words how this accident happened, taking it from a point where you were approaching the scene from, say, half-mile back? Answer, well, as I said, I had passed some eastbound cars, and my lights had been on high beam when I met these cars, and then I turned my headlights on low beam, and I had got a quarter of a mile past the last car when I decided to put my beams up again, when I noticed what appeared to be a black object on my side of the road. I couldn't really distinguish what it was, but I immediately applied the brakes and tried to turn to the left, but I couldn't make it, and I ran into the other car and hit Mr. Paget. Was that your answer?
Yes, it was.
And you'll agree there's no mention in that answer of lights of any sort.
No, there isn't.
Right. Continuing then, skipping the next few questions, not to lose the context. Question 43, did you see any lights or any illumination on the object at all? Answer, no. Were you asked that question, and did you give that answer?
Yes, I was.
And is the object that was there referred to clearly the Paget car?
Yes.
And while you were under oath at the time of the discovery, were you also attempting to do your best at that time to tell the truth?
I always do.
So at the time of your discovery, it was your evidence under oath, the truth as best you saw it, that you didn't see any lights or any illumination on the object at all.
Yes.
Right? You've also, if I caught your evidence correctly, suggested to my learned friend, whether or not the suggestion was proper, that in your belief the lights weren't functioning properly, or the taillights weren't. Did I catch that answer correctly?
That was a presumption I made.
Uh-huh. And
'Cause I didn't see it.
A presumption that you made, I take it, at that time.
Well, yes, I can't understand why I wouldn't have seen it if it would have been on.
Uh-huh. Then going on at question 44, do you have any information as to whether there were any lights on the object? Answer, I have none. Were you asked that question, and did you make that answer?
Yes.
Had you the belief at the time of the discovery that the light wasn't working? By which I mean malfunctioning.
I don't know.
In any event, it's clear from that answer that you didn't, at that time, volunteer this opinion that you've now given.
Yes.
Right. And there was no mention, I put it to you, whatsoever on your discovery of your having seen a light of any sort on the Paget vehicle,
Yes.
nor that you had any information of any kind with respect to its lights.
Yes.
You've since heard Mrs. Paget's evidence,
Yes.
which is that there were lights lit.
Yes.
Right. And now, at least in terms of the timing of the piece, you've changed your evidence.
Well, my present recollection now, thinking back on the accident, was just as I've stated it
Right.
to Mr. FitzPatrick.
And it's a totally different recollection, at least in that regard, from your recollection at the time of discovery.
Yes.
Right. I'm sorry I missed your evidence just now as to the speed at which you were traveling. Or were you asked?
I don't recall being asked.
May I ask you then?
I was traveling about 50, 55 miles an hour.
50, 55? Again, referring to your discovery at question 40. And what was your rate of speed as you approached the point where the accident occurred? Answer, about 55 miles per hour. Were you asked that question, and did you give that answer?
I did.
Now, while there's no great difference, you'll agree that you've modified that somewhat in your own favor by suggesting it might now be 50 to 55.
Well, yes.
And is there any question but that you did give a statement to Sergeant Saunders after the accident?
I did give a statement to the policeman, yes.
And in giving the statement to him, were you doing your best at that time to be honest and fair in telling him those things that happened as you then recalled them?
Yes, but I was very upset at the time.
I have no doubt of that. Is that the excuse you now offer for having apparently told him at that time that your speed was 60 or 65? Or do you say that he's incorrect in having noted that as your statement?
I have to honestly say I remember speaking with Sergeant Saunders, and that I remember him asking me certain questions and giving certain answers, but I don't recollect having said to him 60 or 65 miles an hour. My present recollection of the events leading up to the accident were that I was going about 50 or 55 miles an hour, and I'm sorry, I just can't, I'm not calling the police officer a liar, but I just...
And you were upset at the scene.
I was, yes, very upset.
You'd agree that he was much less so than you.
Yes.
Would that be a reason for perhaps his note made at the time being more accurate than your recollection of what you said and your upset?
Yes.
And despite your upset, I'm sure that while you were being questioned by him and while you were discussing the accident with him, you were conscious of the reason behind his questioning you and the reason for the discussion between you. That is, that he was the investigating officer and that this was part of his function of investigation to get a statement from you?
Yes, I guess I was. I didn't really think about it in those terms.
But the things that he would be interested in, I suppose, would be the things which were material to the accident, of some significance in the whole investigation picture.
Yes.
Right? And the things that you would tell him, I suppose, would be those things which struck you as being significant to the accident. Right?
Well, I answered whatever questions, I guess, he put to me.
Did he ask you if you had had a fight with your girlfriend?
Yes, he did.
How would he come to ask you that? Out
Well,
of the blue?
it didn't, I guess he didn't really ask whether or not I had a fight with my girlfriend. I guess he asked really whether there was anything distracting me before the accident, and I guess it came up in that way. But I do remember discussing with him the
It's
subject.
entirely likely that you volunteered to him the information that you had had a quarrel.
Yes, I did, I believe.
So it had some significance to you at that time.
Yes.
I'm sure it did. The car that you were driving you've described as a Corvette,
Yes, that's right.
also known as a Stingray.
Yes, that's right.
It's what might be called in today's jargon a pretty hot sports car, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Hot in the sense that it has a very powerful engine.
It does have
compared
a powerful engine,
with
yes.
the run-of-the-mill sort of vehicle.
Yes, it does, it's true.
Capable of high speed, speeds in excess of 100.
Well, that's fine. Yes, that's probably true. I've never driven my car that fast, but
But it is a high-performance, high-speed, powerful car.
yes, it is.
Two-seater,
Yes,
sport-type car.
yes,
Right. But you had only had 4 months.
that's about right, yeah.
Right. I'm not entirely clear on one point raised by your counsel. It was with respect to the business of locking the wheels by a firm application of the brakes. You I think, said that I discovered, or I guess I did know, that to lock the wheels was to preclude steering. Now, which was it? Is it something that you've discovered since, or something that you really did then know?
No, I've discovered it. That was the first time that it ever happened to me that I jammed on my brakes under circumstances like that and tried to turn the wheel. But in thinking about it afterwards and in discussing it with Mr. FitzPatrick and other people, I've since discovered that that happens when one jams on the brakes. And
You're saying that you drove for 6 years, was it, before
Yes.
this accident?
yes,
Without being aware of that, or without it ever having been suggested to you?
Yes.
Have you, since the accident, learned of any other techniques of safe driving that you didn't know at that time?
No, not specifically.
But I gather that you now know, if you didn't then, that it's a much more prudent thing and a much safer thing in terms of controlling the car to pump the brakes.
Yes.
And that by the sheer hard application and locking of the wheels, you've disabled yourself from turning to the right or the left.
Yes.
Right. Now, if we take Sergeant Saunders' evidence, we have the Paget car, give or take, 3 feet out onto the pavement, right?
Seemed to me more than that, but...
Right. Right.
Excuse me, my lord, if my learned friend is going to put the evidence of the sergeant to the witness, it's my submission it should be put correctly to him. And the sergeant's evidence was very precise that the car was 3.5 feet out onto the pavement.
That's right. I think you should use the precise
Thank you, my lord.
evidence.
Then, with my learned friend's assistance, we were sure that it was 3.5 feet out onto the pavement. And I think I'm quoting the officer correctly when I say that his measurement of your wheel marks was that they were 2 feet. That is, that the right hand or more northerly track was 2 feet south of the north edge of the pavement, right?
Yes, that's right.
Now, if those 2 facts are accurate, you had only to turn out something slightly better than 1.5 feet to miss the Paget vehicle, right?
I think it'd be a little more than that because
Your
my
estimates
wheel
are
mark-
different.
Well, my wheel marks, I
You'd
have an
have an
overhang.
overhang,
I have an
presumably,
overhang
too.
on my car.
Up 6 inches?
Well,
I don't
because of
want
the
it-
style of my car, there's actually a little more than that.
Well, how much?
Well, I would think, well, maybe 8 inches
8
or 9
inches.
inches.
I wouldn't
not much.
quarrel over 2 inches.
All right.
If you turned out a matter of 2 feet 6 inches, you'd have cleared that vehicle.
I would have cleared the vehicle, yes.
Right. And even if we take your assessment of the position of the Paget vehicle, it really required a pretty modest turn to the left in order to get around that car. Is that not correct?
Yes.
A turn which you apparently realized you had to make when you were 200 feet down the road.
Well, I realized it after I put on my brakes, and I did try, and I guess at that point I was approaching the vehicle. I'm not sure I was 200 feet away at that point, but
Surely, even with your imperfect knowledge of how to apply the brakes, you wouldn't then have applied them fully if you hadn't apprehended some danger. Hey? You saw something 200 feet away
Yes.
that caused you to put on your brakes.
that's true.
Right. So that you were 200 feet away at the moment when you might then have begun very gradually to accomplish this modest move out to the left.
Just in the way I recollect it, Mr. Goudie, I just don't think there was enough time to very gradually pump brakes and
Right.
turn around. It
Because-
all happened very suddenly, and
Because we've got the distance factor and also speed to take into account.
yes,
Right. You'd been driving along the highway before you met these oncoming cars with your lights on high beam
yes,
because you considered that to be safer?
well, yes, yes,
You can see further with your high beams on than you can without them.
that's true.
They light the road ahead substantially further than the low beams.
Yes, they do.
Right. And this is a road where there was no artificial lighting,
No, there was no lighting.
so that the only help you had really was your own headlights in terms of illuminating objects.
Yes,
You turn them down, I guess, rather than interfere with the vision of the people coming towards you.
yes,
You've said that the last of those vehicles had passed you,
yes, that's right.
and that you then subsequently turned them up again, so I take it there were then no other eastbound vehicles coming?
No, I didn't see any.
None. None in the immediate vicinity?
No, none within sight.
So we're completely clear that whether the Paget car was where you say it was on the road or where the sergeant says it was on the road, you had all of the oncoming lane free to you to go around it,
Yes.
and some part, depending on which of you is right, of the westbound lane.
Yes.
Right. And indeed, that's without taking into account the shoulder, which was on the south side of the road.
Yes.
It was almost instantly that you flicked your lights onto high beam that you saw this object.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
Turned out to be the Paget car.
Yes.
And up to the point where you flicked them up, there was nothing to prevent you from having turned them up sooner. You didn't leave them down out of consideration for anyone coming toward you.
No, I didn't. I guess I didn't turn them up because at the time it appeared to me that I could see sufficiently well.
You'll grant, I'm sure, that the lighting in that quarter of a mile was no better than it had been back where you felt it necessary to use the high beams.
Worse, in fact, because it had been an intersection I'd come through, which was lit.
Right. So that in this worse situation of visibility, knowing that you can see further and better with your lights on high beam, you disabled yourself to that extent by leaving them down for a quarter of a mile.
Well,
That's a fact, isn't it?
well, it's the effect of what happened. Although I don't think I consciously disabled myself. I wasn't thinking of that. I just was driving with.
I'm absolutely sure you didn't intend to hit Mr. Paget. It's only in the sense of cause and effect that I put to you that you were disabled and that you were the person who brought it on yourself to that extent. Correct?
Yes.
Were you wearing the same glasses at the time of the accident?
I was.
They haven't been changed.
No.
Did they then still have the same rather smoky effect to them that they have now?
Well, yes, that's because of the type of glass that they are. They're a glass which is light sensitive. They tend to darken when exposed to bright sunlight, and then they grow clear again when they're exposed to darkness.
What visual defect do they correct?
I have an astigmatism.
And for my sake, what does that mean?
Well, I'm not entirely sure. I know that it's a cause of what I think is called short-sightedness. It means that I have difficulty seeing things clearly, which are a long distance away, and I can see clearly things which are a short distance away, and the eyeglasses correct that condition to what is normal vision, 20/20 vision, I guess.
And they've not been changed since?
Not since the date of the
Have
accident.
they been
no.
examined since?
No, it's, I usually have an examination once a year, and I think I had an examination around Christmas time before the accident.
I see. Was it at that time that those glasses were fitted?
Yes.
They
Yes.
were new then?
They were new then, yes.
I see. And was it that you hadn't worn glasses before and were now beginning to wear them, or that you had worn others and that these were a new prescription?
I had worn others, and these were a new prescription.
Somewhat stronger?
At that time, yes, they were, as
Yeah.
a matter of fact.
There's been some deterioration in your sight since the last time.
There had been, that's right.
I have no other questions. Thank you.
Re-examination.
Well, thank you, my lord.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Thank you.
FitzPatrick, your next witness, please.
Thank you, my lord. Miss Hanson, please.
Put your right hand, face right, sir, please.
You swear that the evidence to be given by you to the court and to the jury sworn touching the matter in question between the parties shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you.
I do.
Where do you live, Miss Hanson?
I live at 54 Guelph Road, Brampton.
With whom do you live there?
I live with my mother.
What is your occupation?
I'm a secretary.
Where do you work?
Where do I work?
Yes.
Downtown in the Toronto Dominion Center.
Now, on the 9th of February last, you were involved in a sad accident when you were a passenger in Mr. Bright's car. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Will you tell his lordship and the gentlemen of the jury, please, from where you were coming at the time of that accident?
Well, we were coming from the Brass Rail Tavern. We had been to the hockey game before that.
About what time did you leave the Brass Rail?
It was about 10:30.
And had you had anything to drink at the Brass Rail?
Yes, I had one drink.
What was that?
It was a gin and tonic.
Had Mr. Bright had anything to drink there?
Yes, he did. He had one beer.
So far as you know, had he had anything to drink before that?
No, no, sir.
Was there anything unusual about his condition or appearance?
No.
Had you ridden before in Mr. Bright's car?
Oh, yes.
Did you know anything about its condition?
Oh, yes, it's a nice car, and it rides smoothly, and it went very well. It worked fine.
Do you know anything about how its brakes work?
Well, they seem to work fine.
And were you able to see out of the windshield quite clearly?
Yes, when I was looking.
I see. Now, as you approached the scene of the accident, which we've heard was just west of Highway 27 on Highway number 7, how were you sitting in the car?
Well, I was leaning back with my head resting on the seat, and I was down fairly low.
What was the first indication that you had that there was going to be an accident?
Well, looking back, the first thing I was conscious of was Stephen suddenly put his foot on the brake, and I came forward and I looked up and I remembered seeing the red light.
Did you see anything other than a red light?
No?
How many red lights did you see?
Just one.
Do you know what that red light was?
Well, I didn't at first, but now, you know, of course, I realized it must have been the tail light of the other car.
Is that of the Pageant car?
Yes, sir.
And do you now realize which tail light it was?
Yes, it was on the right-hand side.
Do you know how fast Mr. Bright had been traveling just before you felt the brakes applied?
Well, I didn't notice the speedometer, but I can only go by how Stephen drives in the past, and he usually goes about 50 or 55.
Do you drive a car yourself?
Yes, I do.
Is there any way that you can judge the approximate speed of a car without looking at a speedometer?
Oh, yes, sir. Well, because I drive, I would drive about the same speed that Stephen would.
No, I just want you to tell me, if you are able to, if there was any way in which you could form any estimate of the speed at which the car in which you were riding was traveling just before you felt the brakes go on.
Well, no, not exactly.
All right. Now, there was an impact with the Pageant car, is that correct?
Yes.
Will you tell us, please, what kind of an impact that was? Was it a heavy one, a moderate one, a glancing one, or what kind?
Well, it was the first impact I've ever had in a car, and to me it was quite jarring.
Were you able to form any estimate of the time which elapsed between when you felt the brakes go on and when the impact occurred?
Well, it all seemed to happen so suddenly. It was as if it was all in one movement. I remember Stephen hitting the brakes and me coming forward and looking up and seeing the red light, and then, as a matter of fact, a person standing there, and then the impact, and as I say, it was all in one movement.
Were you aware of any change in the direction of the car, that is your car, between the time you felt the brakes come on and when the impact occurred?
A change in the direction?
Yes. In other words, did your car go straight, or did it angle to the right or to the left? Or what did it do?
I really can't say. I was bracing myself, of course, and it just seemed to be, almost seemed to be skidding.
But it could have been skidding to the right, to the left, or straight ahead. And I take it that you don't know what it was.
No, sir.
Were you aware at any time of any traffic going in the opposite direction and passing you?
No, not before that, no.
Had you been aware of any traffic going in the same direction as you and passing you?
No, not really.
Were you aware of any traffic other than the Paget car ahead of you?
No.
I'm not sure if I asked you this, Miss Hanson, but were you able to tell which of the two taillights on the Paget car it was that you had seen?
She said the one on the right.
Thank you, my lord. Did you see if the one on the left was working after the accident?
No, no.
Did you have any conversation with Mr. or Mrs. Paget after the accident?
Yes, well, after the accident, there seemed to be utter confusion, and I got out of the car, and I was concerned naturally about the people in the car, and I went around the outside of the car, and I had a few words with Mrs. Paget.
What were they?
Well, the thing that sticks in my memory is that when we were talking to Mrs. Paget, she had mentioned the fact, and in sort of a rambling way, that she had begged her husband to always carry a flashlight.
Do you know whether or not Mr. Paget had had a flashlight on the night of the accident?
No, sir.
Did you at any time see one?
No, sir. I don't know whether she meant that if they had a flashlight, they might warn out the traffic, or if she could hold the flashlight while he changed the tire.
Were you able to form any impression as to how far you were from the red light when you first saw it?
Oh, no, no, sir, I couldn't judge.
Did you observe afterwards where the Paget car was on the road?
Well, it seemed to be sticking out on the road.
Could you tell how far into the roadway it projected?
Well, it was about half the car width, I beg your pardon, on the road. It seemed to be.
Was there any room on the shoulder to the north where the Paget car could have been placed?
Oh, yes, there was lots of room.
Did you observe a laneway anywhere in the vicinity?
No, I'm afraid I didn't see one. I was very upset, and I didn't notice one.
That's all. Thank you, Miss Hanson. Thank you, my lord.
Cross-examination. Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you.